All right, let's take you live now to that process to find South Africa's next National Director of Public Prosecutions, which is officially underway. These are the live proceedings. IDEC head and Advocate Andrea Johnson is currently on the stand. Let's listen in.
There hadn't been, for example, a country organized crime strategy. Not even the police have one, Prof. They have standard operating procedures and they have how they work, but there wasn't a national organized crime strategy. That is part of the strategic foresight of the NPA team, that we need to formalize a strategy that is able to deal with the crime threat, which is organized crime. In doing so, I am aware that there were lots of consultations with people who are in the field, experts in the field who helped guide the strategy, as well as then with law enforcement. With the corruption, the strategy in IDEC has been to deal as holistically as we can with the various corruption matters that we have, and to ensure that they get enrolled. But I can see Prof's hand. I may not have answered it in the way the Prof anticipated.
No, he still had other questions as well.
Oh, my apologies.
I asked them not to go too much. They just ask questions, you answer, and then they can do a follow-up. Proceed, Prof.
The reason I invoke the issue of strategic foresight is that, for the most part, either you talk of IDEC where you are, but we wanted you to lift your gaze to the horizon of a vision
For the NPA.
For the NPA. And that is where I was trying to say, can't we lift that gaze? Because you will not be appointed back to IDEC should you be a successful candidate.
Understood.
But having said that, you mentioned twice the meeting of targets.
Correct.
Would meeting of target generated by your institution or your unit be the same as having an impact? Because there's one compliance matter where people say these are the targets. There's another one where you say, no matter the targets, the needle is not shifting. Can you reflect on that?
And correctly so, Prof. I know that there has been much debate. Even when we go to Parliament, Parliament has asked, well done, you've achieved your target. But what does that equate in terms of impact on the people whom you serve, which would be our South Africans, regardless of the crime type? And that is an issue that I know that we have been discussing in the NPA overall. How do we measure impact? Targets are numbers, but do those targets deal with the right cases, the cases that can elevate what we are doing? So if you take, for example, I remember there's a matter, it's a corruption matter not in IDEC. It deals with the Lepelle Water Board, I think in Polokwane. And because of the fraud and corruption there, it was identified that the corruption in that matter must be dealt with. What it did is, if you deal with that matter, and if asset forfeiture is able to bring back the money, one might be able to put it back into the criminal asset recovery account and therefore give government the impetus to then put in a water supply for the community that was robbed of its water supply because of the corruption. That is how I consider as defining impact. Targets are numbers. And so what we have to do differently is understand which matters affect the South African population. So impact can be measured differently. It is what kind of recourse do you give to a community when you address the crime in that community? It's the same with drugs, Prof, is dealing with drugs and dealing with drug syndicates may bring relief when you arrest those persons. But in other matters, you need to be able to recoup the money so that services and service delivery goes back to a community. That, for me, is the impact of matters. Targets are part of performance achievement. They are part of the indicators, but not all targets. talk to impact, because you have to identify those matters that will make impact across the board.
Thank you, Minister. Advocate Johnson, admittedly, humanity is fallible. But the position that you hold requires a higher degree of care and skill in the execution of your function.
Correct.
Now, I'm raising this issue at the backdrop of the two cases that were mentioned earlier, which you readily admitted to have not handled properly. The Estina matter, as well as the Coco matter, that they were placed on the roll prematurely, and that you've drawn lessons from such mishaps. But the higher standard of care and skill wouldn't permit us to just brush it aside and move on as though it's business as usual. Because that higher standard of care and skill does not, regrettably, allow a space for complacence. And my view and take in handling of these two matters points towards you having been complacent and having exercised poor judgment in rolling matters or enrolling matters prematurely. Now,
I'll let you finish, sir.
Yes.
Sorry.
Now, this talks to consequence management. Reverting to my earlier sentiments, it cannot be, and these matters cannot be treated as business as usual. Surely there should have been consequence management, looking into the calamitous effect of having such high-profile matters withdrawn due to lack of readiness on behalf of the state. Was there such consequence management applied to you specifically, other than just having drawn lessons from such mishaps?
The Estina matter, just to be clear, was not a premature enrollment. However, the court there felt that the evidence that we gave, albeit that we provided it to the defense a year before, because we provided it in a different medium later on, they should have been allowed an opportunity to go through that. So, but in the Coco matter, yes, we took the lessons, but I take the point. The national director did call me in, as I reported to her, and we had to provide a report on how we made that kind of error in underestimating, and the only error was the underestimation of time to complete those specialized services. The national director did indicate to the team and I, as we were all called in collectively, that the matters need to be adjudicated differently. She did talk about what you mentioned, and that we should have more care in how we enroll these matters. So I'm not sure how far the consequence management should have gone, but we were addressed. And that was part of how we now, in terms of the question also by the minister, where one would expect there to be more enrollments, there aren't as many enrollments because we exercise a duty of care more diligently, given what had happened with that premature enrollment of the Coco matter.
So that was just a slap on the wrist. There was no disciplinary action whatsoever taken, notwithstanding the consequences
So in terms
or
of...
the effect that this had, not only towards the proper administration of justice, but in perpetuating the erosion of public trust in prosecution.
I know that for myself personally, when it came to my performance assessment, I received a score I had not received in my 28 years at the time of being a prosecutor. The national director marked me down to a 2 as part of my not having performed as I should have in that area of work. But that was as far as it went, and I take the point. I can't take it any further.
Okay.
That is what was done.
Just one last point. You indicated that you got to know of the impact of the GBVF when you
Went to Parliament?
When you were in Parliament, and that was the first time you got to be aware of the impact, or rather the statistics and the challenges that bedeviled the institution at the time. And part of your reason for being oblivious to that fact was that was not necessarily your area of focus. But you're sitting here today as a candidate for appointment to the highest echelons within the NDPP. I would take it that you did not develop interest in this position overnight. And I take it, if I'm correct, then you should have had interest in broader areas of performance within the institution. And by your own admission, you didn't really have demonstrated that interest, because you had proximity to management, you had proximity to access reports that will inform you of the direction the institution was taking, and you missed that opportunity.
May I expand?
Yes.
So I wasn't oblivious to GBVF. You cannot be a woman in this country. And I am the mother of a girl child. I'm not oblivious to GBVF in the country.
Within the, sorry to interject, within the context of the statistics that I'm referring to, which you were not aware and up until you were in Parliament.
I was aware that there are high numbers of GBVF cases across the board because it is publicly published and talked about. I became keenly aware of our failure as the NPA in dealing with GBVF in a specific area for a specific time because it was raised where I was. That it doesn't take away that I was aware that GBVF is an issue. I was also aware that there are high-profile matters within the NPA. I do follow in terms of the serial rapist matters, matters that affect children, child rape matters. Those I'm aware of as a citizen, but also as a prosecutor. But the numbers, I was not aware, sir, of the numbers.
Maybe just to assist them, Mr. Mutlong, maybe I put it differently, Advocate Johnson. You're part of the management of NPA as
Correct.
a senior manager. So has NPA in its executive meetings ever considered the performance on sexual offenses, conviction, and what has been? Because listening here, it doesn't look like it has ever been. And it's one of the areas that NPA has not been doing well.
So they do provide those figures. At the majority of the time, it is presented at the NOM meeting, which is the one that is chaired by the head of the NPS. I don't attend those all the time. But when we are at EXCO, yes, there is a breakdown at every meeting of the performance of the NPA. So I was aware of the global performance and on non-performance. What I was trying to point out is the specific and how bad it was at the time that it was raised. What it didn't do, and I'm subject to correction, I cannot recall what the breakdowns would be, but I did know that we were not performing well as the NPA in sexual offences matters, but became more keenly aware when this was raised in the very specific way in that Matlong as it was in Parliament.
Thanks. Just last part of that is the Omotoso case as well.
Yes, sir.
That you were also not aware of the nub of the case itself, because that also fell outside the purview of your area of work.
No, correction. Yes. It's not that I was not aware of the nub. That was such a widely publicized case in the country. So I was aware of the charges. I was aware that there were many charges that were facing the accused at the time, and I do know that the case took long. Where I then drew an acute interest was how we lost the case. I then drew interest therein, but I was not oblivious to the case.
Yes,
there are some matters that you become aware of, sir, because, as I said, in the meeting that is chaired by the head of NPS, some of the high-profile matters are, in fact, mentioned. And this was a matter that took 7 or 8 years, and during the course of that time, this matter was mentioned, but not that there were challenges in the matter, at least not in a meeting where I was. Remember, sir, that those meetings that they would have about GBVF would also not be in the management meetings. There would be separate meetings with those people who deal with GBVF and or the respective DPP office.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Maluleka.
Thank you, Chair, and good afternoon, Advocate Johnson.
Good afternoon, ma'am.
So earlier on, you talked about an observation around morale of staff. I think your words were, you weren't going to be clear about to what extent low morale's got to do with disgruntlement and whether or not it's legitimate matters. What is the conversation that's being held at the Executive Committee or at MANCO, which I believe you're also part of, that around the morale of staff? Could you maybe give us a sense about the conversation that's being had on this very topic?
So the main part of the conversation is had we gotten to the source of the problem? We hadn't, but we had been having conversations about how is it that we've had a changed management, that we have more resources, that we have more capacity, and that we have more training, that staff are still disgruntled. And what we sought to do in those meetings is to look at, I know they did cohesion sessions for the staff with outside parties. That feedback was brought into the fore to understand what the unhappiness was about. A lot of the unhappiness, from my own understanding and interpretation of those, has been that prosecutors feel that especially communication of management issues are not conveyed timeously when you have changes of management. People want to know, why is Andrea Johnson in that job? Were we given an opportunity? No, we were not given an opportunity. People may see that in terms of certain appointments, people are favored, and they make their own deductions about why people might be favored. And so those are long-standing issues. And I think one of the most important things is something Minister has done, and if Minister will allow me to allude to it, it's become very important in how we do our appointments, especially of senior management, because the appointment of senior management talks to transparency and it talks to credibility. And that the NPA, that has been the biggest gripe. People on the ground want to know how senior managers are appointed. As the panel would know, most, if not all, from the DPPs to the SDPPs, DNDPPs, are appointed, Minister, you'll forgive my wording, at the behest of a national director. These people do not attend interviews, etc. That is the core gripe, Maluleka, of the staff, And the one thing Minister has made very clear is that must change. Also how we recruit internally. The panel cannot only consist of internal people. We must have someone from outside. It brings an independent mind to bear. It also brings a sense of comfort and confidence to those NPA officials that are applying for the post. The majority of it is within the recruitment. Secondly, it is the morale talks to the training. Unfortunately, when training initiatives are presented, not everyone is available. You end up finding that the same person goes to 2 or 3 training ventures for that year, and then that in itself causes a lot of dissatisfaction. But the majority of it has been how appointments have been made, and the transparency with appointments, because people want to know, and they have every right to know.
So earlier on, you talked about the organized crime strategy, right? That had been the outcome of a consultative process with other institutions. And it was approved, I think you said late 2024. What's the status of its implementation as things stand, and what is the current conversation about it at EXCO?
So the organized crime strategy became actionable from the date of the signature. So I cannot remember the exact date, but in 2024 when it was signed. What that has done is it has made, there's a different engagement with prosecutors on the ground. So organized crime prosecutors always formed part of a component, and they just dealt with the matters as they came in. What now happens is, if you take a division, the DPP gets to understand at a higher level what the organized crime priorities are. And the DPP has to then ensure that they have dedicated staff to deal with those priorities, and also what the engagements must be with the stakeholders, who the relevant stakeholders are, and what will drive the identification, investigation, and prosecution of those matters. They are happening in all of the organized crime components as they are across the country. And then there is a lot of engagement with the organized crime component that sits at head office in terms of mentoring and in terms of ensuring that the plan is implemented and that the partners still remain on track, especially the DPCI, because the organized crime, Maluleke, that we talk about is the higher levels of organized crime dealt with by the DPCI. And what the NPA also does is there's an active engagement in the projects committee. In the divisions, provinces, they're called provincial project committees, and then the National Projects Committee of the DPCI, where the NPA also sits. Projects are then presented, and they then get to decide in terms of priorities as a law enforcement group, together with asset forfeiture. I believe the South African Revenue Services sit there, the FIC, as well as the SIU are also in attendance. So the approach is holistic, and the partners, together with the NPA, drive the priorities and the crime types that are identified. So it is being implemented.
Thank you, Minister. Advocate Johnson, I just wanted to ride on Professor Fikeni's comment. This one is a comment just to say, I'm a bit concerned about your level of vigilance, you know, because one would expect it to be much higher than an ordinary person. You know, not belaboring the issue of the deductions that started in 2000. They're going for 20, I don't know what years now, 26, 25 years. And that is worrying to me, because that has got an impact on who you are in the eyes of certain people inside. That's one of the many reasons. But secondly, I also, you know, why I had to bring it back, the issue of referees, you know, I would expect somebody who has got a friend who is maybe a scientist or something to say they were acting as a judge and write that, not you and me.
Correct.
We are lawyers.
Correct.
And it's worrying me that we had to pick it up here you know how judges act. This person is a magistrate.
Correct.
You have written a senior judge. It's almost, it's bordering, if not full-blown, misleading. Because if some of the panel members or all of us did not know what an acting judge is, it gives it a different turn altogether. One of your referees is an acting judge.
Correct.
As opposed to a magistrate. Those things worry me. They're small, but they worry me. A third one is the Estina matter was also thrown out of court as a result of unreasonable delays. And you have not mentioned it. You know, so that's how I say maybe it's just comments, but unreasonable delays in the courts is fundamental because it goes to the heart of justice and a fair trial and access to the courts and therefore access to justice. You know, so it's worrying me that the way you look at things or the way you couch them, it's a different certain level of a truth as you see it, but not necessarily an absolute truth. I think I'm also trying to be strategic.
No,
but you hear me.
No, I hear you.
It's already 3 examples.
Yes.
Wherein, at the end of the day, you have not been entirely truthful. Let me just put it out there.
Absolutely, and I want to be very clear. I have not been dishonest.
Okay.
I honestly overlooked those referees. I honestly did, because at the time when I received the call, I sent my CV. You have no reason not to say I have to be even more vigilant. And in Estina, I didn't hide anything. Part of the unreasonable delays was the disclosure. I talked to what the court found about why that matter was struck off the roll. So please, do not see the response as being dishonest. I responded as I do because I took the points that I saw. At no stage is it ever my intent. If that is the impression that was created, I can't fault me for making the deduction that you do. It was never the intention.
Should we then conclude that, maybe the mic there? Should we then conclude that your ability to pay attention to detail is a bit of an issue? Let me tell you why. Let me give her the CV. Your CV is full of flaws. There's inconsistency between your CV and the form that we've sent you.
Sure.
And that is worrying for me. I just looked at it. If we go to your CV, and because you work with me, you know me by now that I do pay attention to details. Look at the position you're saying there, page 4 is fine. It's Investigative Directorate 1 March 2022 to date. You go to the next one. Company section, DPP Pretoria, Senior Deputy Director Public Prosecution, February 2012 to date. You go previous employer, company, Department of Justice, Section Magistrate Court. Next one, prosecutor, 1996, 1998.
Yes. At the time, it was the Department of Justice.
But the years are not correlating. Oh, yeah, that one is fine.
Yes.
Oh, that one is fine. It's the other one that I picked up. And then you go to 98 to 99.
Yes.
That's what you had corrected on the form. Go to the next one, and then 1999 to 2004. That one is fine. 2004. I'll show you the other one that has a problem. Because I've been corresponding.